Hi, I'm Katie of Modern Textiles, and today I'm going to explain to you all about quilting wide backs as well as different types of quilting backs you can use to finish your quilts. And if you stick around, I'm going to go over quick quilt math both for wide backs as well as regular standard quilting cotton, so you make sure you have the right amount of fabric for your quilt tops. So right here I've got a bolt of 108-inch wide back. This is actually going to be, in case you're wondering, from Wyndham Fabrics. It's going to be from Heather Ross's line, and it's just these darling strawberries, and they're fabulous. So the one nice thing about wide backs is that you don't have to worry about piecing your quilt backs when you're getting ready to quilt up your quilt. So they come in 108-inch as well as 118-inch wide. That's the width of fabric. And so when you are going to say have your throw quilt or maybe bed size quilt, if it's say 60 inches wide, all you need to get is 68 inches by the width of fabric of this quilting cotton, and there's no seaming, no piecing needed for your quilt back. The one thing, there's a few, I guess, topics to talk about when it comes to quilt backs. Some people notice that there's a little bit different feel when it comes to wide backs. I would say anything that's going to be at quilt shop quality. So you've got your name brand Moda, Robert Kaufman, you've got Wyndham Fabrics, things of that nature that are quilt shop quality. I wouldn't worry about utilizing scraps from quilt backs into maybe a scrappy type quilt in the future. But if you're going to be looking at more of like the Michaels, Hobby Lobby, what might used to be Joanne Fabrics, those type of wide backs, you might want to just keep an eye on how tight the weave is of your fabric, as well as if there's any type of, if you notice any type of starching or chemicals. There's a little bit different feel sometimes, just because there is a little bit more of a process due to the width of fabric being so wide. There might be more chemicals or starches used in the manufacturing process to make sure that they're able to get onto the bolt and things like that. To learn a little bit more about the wide backs, if you ever order a wide back online or even in a quilt shop, you may notice that they tear the wide back just to make sure it stays on grain. And that way when you get, say, 2 yards of a wide back, you're going to get that full 2 yards, because when they roll the wide back onto this bolt, it's really tough not to have, as you can see, deep creasing and things like that. So it's very tough for a quilt shop to go ahead and cut that with a typical rotary tool or scissors. So typically you'll see that there's going to be some tearing involved just so it stays on grain. And then that way when you get your wide back, it's actually going to be true all the way down from selvage to selvage, square as you need it for your quilting. You're not going to have any type of weird bowing due to folds in the fabric. Moving on, got some little cards here to show you the quilt math. There's another one of a wide back that you may come into contact with, or that you've heard about, maybe you don't know about, is going to be minky wide back. So this is a 90-inch wide minky. So that's just like really soft. It's got a little bit of a pile to it, not much. That way you can have a really snuggly type quilt. I love using minky for any of the quilts that stay in our house. We live in a colder climate, so it's really nice to have snuggly quilts that have a little bit more heft to them, a little bit more weight to them, especially during those winter and cooler months. All right, moving into a bit more of the quilt math here. So I've made just little paper diagrams to make it really simple, and that way I can write the dimensions for you. We've got our quilt top here. So say you've finished up your quilt top, you've measured your quilt top, you're 60 inches wide, and you have a 70-inch tall quilt top that you're either going to want to quilt on your own domestic machine, or if you're going to send it off to a long arm quilter. Typically, your long arm quilter is going to want at least 4 inches on each side of your quilt. Okay, so if you're using just standard quilting cotton width of fabric, I've got 42 inches is the width of fabric. Dimension, sometimes it's up to 45 inches, sometimes it's 40. Really depends on the manufacturer you're buying through. But the big thing here is, so we've got our 60-inch quilt top that's wide by 70 inch, sorry. And then you've got 68-inch cut by width of fabric. You're going to want 2 pieces of width of fabric So that way when you seam this together, you're probably going to be closer to that 41 inch or maybe closer to 40 inch. So you'll have a total of 68 inches wide by about 80 inches in height. So that way, when you send your quilt and quilt back and your quilt top off to your long armor, or if you're even, you know, using your domestic, or if you're going ahead and doing hand quilting or tying, you've got plenty of room around the outside border to make sure that there's no concern of you going off of not having enough quilt back. So the main reason, just a forewarning of why long arm quilters want to have this additional space on the outside of your quilt back, is one, for loading onto their long arm frame. I'm a long arm quilter, so if you haven't noticed that, we have a leader that comes down off the top bar that we need to pin to, magnets, whatever they use to load your quilt back onto that leader. We need to have room there, so that way the long arm the head of it does not run into the loading system or onto the leader. And then same on the very bottom. We need to have our leader loaded up onto the bottom of your quilt back. And then the reason why we have it on the sides is while we're going and quilting, we use clamps on the sides just to make sure that your quilt back stays taut and you don't have any type of puckers taking place, and as well as making sure the machine head doesn't get caught up on that outside edge and drag your quilt back underneath your quilt. So that would be the reason why you need that 8 inches added on to your quilt dimensions in order to send it off to a long arm quilter. It's also just typical of what you'll see when it comes to quilt patterns, that is going to be what you'll see on the backing requirements for fabric. So we've gone over what you need for if you're using typical traditional quilting cotton of about 42 inch width of fabric. Now moving on to like this Heather Ross one here, this beautiful strawberries. I've got that same 68 inch dimension from side to side, but then because it's 108 inch wide back, 108 inch wide backing, I've got a full length of 108 inch, okay? So you've got plenty of excess here. The nice thing about having this excess, you can ask your long arm quilter if they would like for you to trim that off so it's down to 78 inches. More than likely, my preference as a long arm quilter, just send the full 108. I'm going to tuck this up as much as possible so you can have as much excess as possible sent back to you. And that way, like I said earlier, using this excess is great for using scrappy quilts, log cabins, other scrappy quilts that you find out there online, and use it for another project rather than just getting rid of it. So you may think that that's a lot of waste, but if you're into scrappy quilting or even using it for bindings, that's what I use it for a lot. If I'm using something that's a smaller type of print, it's really easy to use for binding then too, because you have a lot longer lengths. And last but not least, if we have our minky battings. So we've got 68 inches, once again, that width plus 8 inches, and then it's in a 90 inch wide. So that's what this minky comes in for the longest width of fabric. So putting that right on top here, you got your 4 inches, 4 inches, 4 inches, and then you're gonna have about, what did I say? About 12 inches on the bottom for excess. Minky's a little bit tougher to use for random excess. I do like to use them for little kids' toys, little plushies, things like that, that just get used, because I don't know if you've got kids or nieces, nephews, anyone that's young in your life, they love to collect those stuffies hard. I actually have a Simple Softy pattern that utilizes anything from fleece to this minky, just the excess cuts, and that way they just get used in a second life somewhere. In the next video, I'm going to show you the top 3 ways to bind quilts.